Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to be tackling a really heavy topic. We're diving into the kind of messy relationship between suicide and guns and mass shootings right here in the U.S.
It's a conversation that we need to be careful with,
Absolutely.
And the research we're looking at today gives us a really great framework for understanding it all.
It does. So we're looking at a 2020 academic article. The title is, are you ready for this? The Relationship of Suicides, Guns, and Mass Shootings in the United States. An Ethical Dilemma.
Definitely attention-grabbing.
It is. And the authors are Bahaudin G. Mujtaba, Albert A. Williams, and Khalil S. Wardak. They published this in a journal called Socioeconomic Challenges, and it is chock full of fascinating stuff.
Oh, yeah, it really is. And, before we get into the findings, just worth noting the scale of this problem, Over 30,000 people every year in the U.S. die by suicide. That makes it the 10th leading cause of death.
It's a stat that really hits home. Behind those numbers are real people, real families dealing with the fallout. So let's get into it. What were your first thoughts when you looked at this article?
Well, the researchers picked Broward County, Florida as sort of like a microcosm for the whole U.S. They looked at, get this, 3,238 suicide cases from 2000 to 2013. That's a lot of data.
14 years worth. And, sometimes these academic articles can be kind of dry, but then you think about those stories behind the numbers.
Oh, for sure.
It makes it real. Yeah.
It does. It does. One of the things that just jumps out at you is how often guns were used. A full 42% of suicides in Broward County involved firearms, like way more than you'd think.
It is incredibly high. It really makes you think about how easy it is to get guns in this country.
Yeah.
And what part that plays in these tragedies.
And that's a big question. And the researchers really dig into that. They say better gun control has got to be a part of stopping suicides.
This is probably where things start to get political. We are not here to take sides. We're just presenting the research and letting you, the listener, decide what you think.
Exactly. It's also important to remember that this is just about Broward County. You can't just assume this is how it is everywhere in the U.S.
Good point. Every area has its own unique situation, right?
Right.
Different cultures, different access to resources. But even with those limits, this research has some cool things to say about suicide. Like, for instance, they found a huge difference between men and women. 75% of suicides in Broward County were men.
Yeah, and that matches what we see nationwide, sadly. Men are way more likely to die by suicide. It makes you think about how we raise boys and men,
Yeah.
What's expected of them, how do they deal with their problems?
Do they get the right support?
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
And then there's the breakdown by race. 85% of suicides were white Americans, then 8.5% Black Americans, 5% Hispanic, and just 1% Asian American.
So white Americans had the highest rate overall, but did they all use guns?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Guns were the most common way to commit suicide for every single racial group.
That's surprising. I would have thought there would be more variation.
It just shows you how much of a gun culture there is in the U.S., how it goes beyond race and all that. It also makes you think we need to look deeper than just the overall numbers. Each community has its own unique experiences.
It's like you peel back one layer and there's always another one. It's what makes this research so fascinating. It makes you really think about suicide in new ways.
Yeah, it really does. And speaking of different ways to look at this, the researchers talk about age as a factor, too. They found that older people were more likely to commit suicide.
Which kind of makes sense in a way, right? As you get older, maybe you lose people you love, your health gets worse, money gets tighter,
Right. And you don't always have the support you need.
It reminds us that we got to be paying attention to our older folks, too. Making sure they are okay.
Absolutely. And speaking of mental health, I've found this idea of subtle suicide really interesting.
Oh, yeah, that was a kind of scary term. What was that about again?
It's basically when people do things that are bad for them, not things that'll kill them right away, but things that wear them down over time, like maybe they drink too much or just don't take care of themselves, it can be really hard to spot.
Like a slow burn, right? And you wonder how many people are doing this without even realizing it.
Exactly. So we need to be talking about this more. We need to recognize those signs in ourselves and the people we care about. Because stopping suicide isn't just about stopping people from, doing something drastic.
It's about being there for each other before things get to that point.
Exactly.
It's about building a society where we care for one another.
That's it.
It makes you realize that we all have a part to play in this, whether it's checking in on a friend who's feeling down or just educating ourselves about what to look for.
Yeah.
Or even pushing for better mental health care in our communities. It's a shared responsibility.
It is. And, this research also talks about mass shootings.
Right?
It acknowledges how awful they are and how they're tied to suicide.
The article had this whole table
Mm.
listing all these mass shootings. It's a scary reminder of how often they happen
Yeah.
and how brutal they are. And, I thought it was interesting that the authors kind of push back on a common idea about mass shootings.
You mean the idea that it's all about mental illness?
Exactly. They argue that mental health might be part of it, but it's often a bunch of things together, like ideology, being isolated, and obviously guns being too easy to get.
Yeah, it's important to make that distinction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Saying it's just mental illness is oversimplifying things. It's not fair to people who are struggling with mental health.
We got to look at the bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about this research. It doesn't give easy answers. It pushes us to really think hard about these issues.
It's about asking those tough questions, about facing the hard truths, and being open to changing how we see things. And ultimately, it's about making the world a safer, kinder place. As we wrap up part 1 here, I'm feeling both the weight of the problem and a sense of hope.
I agree. It's a really sobering but hopeful realization. The statistics are scary, the stories are heartbreaking, but there's this commitment to finding solutions.
It's building a better society.
That gives me hope.
Well said.
Welcome back to the deep dive. As we go further into this research on suicide and guns and mass shootings, one thing becomes really clear. To prevent these things, we have to try to understand what drives people to do them.
Right. It's easy to just label these people as monsters, but as we've been talking about, it's a lot more complicated than that.
It is, and the article actually lists a bunch of mass shootings. It shows the different reasons behind each one.
Yeah, that was a pretty intense list. Some of them seem to be driven by revenge, like the Oklahoma City bombing.
Right. Timothy McVeigh was furious at the government for what happened at Waco,
Yeah.
and that rage led to violence.
It's a terrible reminder of how powerful anger and extreme beliefs can be, and how they can lead to these acts.
Then you've got cases like Columbine, where it seems like they just wanted to be infamous, to be known for doing something horrible.
It's crazy to think that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were competing with other school shooters, like they wanted to kill more people than anyone before them.
It's chilling, but then there are cases like the Las Vegas shooting where we just don't know why.
Yeah, the Las Vegas shooting is a haunting one. We still don't really know what Stephen Paddock's motivation was. It's frustrating for everyone involved.
It is. It shows that sometimes we just don't have clear answers.
And that can be really tough for the families left behind. They're left wondering why, with no real answers.
Yeah, it's got to be so hard.
But even when we do know the motives, like with the Charleston church shooting, it brings up a whole other set of tough questions.
You're talking about Dylan Roof, right? Where racism was clearly the driving force. It makes us face these really uncomfortable truths about hate and how it can lead to violence.
It's like a wake-up call. We need to be actively fighting against hate and bigotry wherever we see it, and realize that these things are connected to the problem of violence.
It's about building a society based on understanding and empathy, where we don't tolerate hate, but challenge it. And it starts with each of us, looking at our own biases and calling out harmful stereotypes.
This research also got into some ethical dilemmas around suicide, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that's where things get even more complex. The article talks about the balance between individual choice and our duty to protect life.
It's tricky, right? We want people to be free to make their own choices, but we also have a responsibility to prevent harm.
Exactly. And suicide can have a huge impact, not just on the person, but on their family, their community, everyone.
It's like that saying, a ripple effect.
Yeah.
The effects spread outward, way beyond the individual.
For sure. And the impact on the people left behind is huge. They feel so much guilt, confusion, and loss.
It's devastating. And the article also brings up subtle suicide again. That idea that people can harm themselves in ways that aren't immediately fatal but still have serious consequences.
Right, like slowly chipping away at their well-being. And even though it might not be an immediate threat, the ethical concerns are still there.
It's not just about stopping someone from taking their life in a drastic way. It's about recognizing those smaller signs and supporting them before things escalate.
Exactly. It's about creating a society where mental health is valued and supported.
Where people feel comfortable asking for help.
Yeah. And that brings us to the big question. What can we actually do to build that kind of society? What are the concrete steps?
I'm glad you asked. Because the researchers actually offer some solutions. One of them, which might be controversial, is making it harder to get guns. especially the really powerful ones.
Right. That's always a tough conversation.
It is.
But the research is clear. Fewer guns, especially the ones made for mass killings, means fewer suicides and mass shootings.
It's a debate we need to have, especially in a country where guns are such a big part of the culture. If we want to save lives, we got to talk about it.
For sure. And the researchers also talk about making people more aware of mental health issues and getting them better access to care.
That's huge, right?
Right.
We need to get rid of the shame around mental health so people feel comfortable seeking help.
Exactly. It's not just about having more therapists and counselors.
Yeah.
It's about making it normal to talk about mental health.
Like, imagine if mental health checkups were just as common as going to the doctor for a physical.
I love that idea. It's about building more supportive society where people aren't afraid to reach out when they're struggling.
And it's about addressing bigger issues, too, right? Like social isolation, discrimination, poverty. Those things contribute to suicide and mass shootings as well.
Absolutely. We need to get to the root of the problem. We need a society where everyone feels valued and connected.
It's about understanding that mental health isn't just a personal problem, it's a societal one.
Exactly. We all have a part in creating a healthier, safer world.
You know, this all really emphasizes how important it is to break down the stigma around mental health.
It's so important. We need to be able to talk about mental health as openly as we talk about physical health.
Imagine if someone could just say, I'm struggling mentally, as easily as they say, I have a cold.
That's the kind of world we need to create.
Where people feel safe asking for help without feeling judged or shamed.
And it's not just about what individuals can do, it's about changing the system too.
Right.
We need to push for better funding for mental health care, more access to services, and a more inclusive society.
It's a collective responsibility. We all have to work together to create a world where everyone feels supported and empowered to get the help they need. This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
There really has.
It's given me a whole new perspective.
The research is really powerful.
It is, and I know our listeners are eager to hear more about it. Welcome back for the last part of our deep dive. As we've been going through this research, one thing that stood out to me is just how much data they collected.
Oh, yeah, they really dug deep. They broke down suicides in Broward County by everything, method, demographics, even what time of day it happened.
It's amazing how detailed it is. Like, for example, they found that gun suicides were way more common in older people.
And here's something interesting. So remember how we said guns were the top method for every race?
Right.
Well, for other methods, there actually were some differences between racial groups. Like hanging was more common among Black, Hispanic, and Asian folks compared to white Americans.
That is interesting. You have to wonder if there's a cultural aspect to that. Or maybe it has to do with what methods are available to them.
Definitely something to think about. And it just goes to show you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to prevention. You got to consider the experiences and challenges that are specific to each community.
Exactly. We can't just assume everyone's the same. We need to understand the different factors at play for each group.
For sure. And it's not just about mental health, right? It's about creating a world where everyone feels supported and connected, where they feel like they belong and their life has meaning.
You mentioning meaning makes me think about that guy, Viktor Frankl. He wrote about finding meaning, even in the midst of suffering.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
His point was that even when things are really bad, people still search for purpose in their lives.
Right.
And when you lose that sense of purpose, that's when despair can set in.
That's so powerful. And it means that preventing suicide isn't just about treating mental illness. It's about helping people feel connected to something bigger than themselves, helping them find that meaning and purpose.
It's about giving people hope, making them believe things can get better, that their life matters. And that's where community comes in. Having strong relationships, feeling like you belong, those things can make a huge difference when someone's struggling.
You're so right. It's like a safety net. And it's not just therapists or counselors. It's your friends, family, anyone who can just listen and be there for you.
You know, this whole conversation keeps bringing us back to how important it is to get rid of the stigma around mental health.
Oh, for sure. We have to make it as normal to talk about your mental health as it is to talk about a cold or the flu.
Right. Imagine a world where you could say, hey, I'm not doing so well mentally, without feeling like you're going to be judged.
I love that. That's the kind of environment we need, where people feel safe asking for help.
We have to break down all those barriers that keep people from getting the support they need.
Yeah.
And we need to see mental health as just as important as physical health.
Totally.
Asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individuals changing their attitudes, it's about the whole system. We need better funding for mental health care.
More services, and a society where everyone feels included and supported.
Exactly. Everyone deserves access to the help they need, no matter who they are or what their situation is.
As we wrap up this deep dive on suicide, guns, and mass shootings, I have to admit it's a bit overwhelming. But I'm also feeling hopeful.
I agree.
The statistics are scary, the stories are heartbreaking, but seeing people working towards solutions, trying to make a difference, that gives me hope.
Me too. Yeah, we face huge challenges, but we also have this incredible ability to care for one another, to innovate, to come together and create change. If we can face these issues head on and challenge the way things are and really push for change, we can create a world where these tragedies happen less and less, maybe even a world where they don't happen at all.
Thank you for being on this journey with us. Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand these complicated issues, the better equipped we are to make a difference. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep fighting for a better world.